They abandoned her in a sack to die. Then an alpha king heard a tiny voice say, "Help me." Rain pelted the forest in sheets, turning the ground into a muddy river. The wind howled through the skeletal trees, bending their branches like desperate hands reaching for something beyond reach. In the midst of this storm, a small bundle thudded against the wet earth. A baby girl wrapped in a coarse sack lay alone, shivering and crying, her voice nearly drowned by the thunder. Her parents, or what little family she had abandoned her here. They feared a curse. They whispered in fear of the blood moon, a rare celestial event that had passed the night she was born. Superstition had ruled their hearts, and so they had chosen cruelty over love. The baby's cries pierced the night, a fragile thread of life and hope that refused to be silenced. Far above the forest, in a towering castle shrouded in mist, a figure stood by the battlements. The Alpha King, known across the lands for his power and ruthless justice, had eyes as sharp as steel and a heart that few dared to see. He listened not for the wind, not for the rain, but for life itself. And then he heard it, a faint, fragile cry. "Help me," the king frowned. That tiny voice, so small and helpless, stirred something deep inside him, a feeling long buried under the weight of power and duty. Without a word, he swung his cloak around his broad shoulders and descended into the storm, moving with the silence and precision of a predator. The forest was alive with shadows and every step was perilous, but the sound guided him, unwavering and true, until he reached a small clearing. There, lying in the mud, was the child. Her tiny body shook with cold, her eyes wide and luminous in the dark. He knelt beside her, his massive hands cupping her fragile form. The baby's gaze met his, and in that instant the world seemed to shift. The Alpha King, feared by kingdoms and whispered about in legends, felt a pang he could not name. Protection, curiosity, and an unspoken sense of destiny surged through him. "Who left you here?" he murmured, though he already knew the answer. There was no one around, not even a trace of human footprints, only the wet earth and the relentless rain. The baby's lips trembled, forming sounds too weak for comprehension. Yet he understood. She wanted to live. She had come into this world with a voice that demanded to be heard. The king could not leave her. He would not. He scooped her into his arms, wrapping her in the thick folds of his cloak. She curled against his chest, shivering, her small hands clutching his tunic. The warmth of the king's body and the fire of his presence seemed to soothe her, and for the first time her cries slowed. As he carried her through the forest, shadows moved at the edges of his vision. Figures hidden in the trees watched silently, their intentions unclear. Some were spirits of the forest, remnants of an ancient curse that lingered from centuries past. Others were perhaps human, though the king doubted it. Whoever they were, they did not approach. The forest seemed to acknowledge the king's authority, bowing under his silent command. By the time they reached the castle, the storm had begun to ease, leaving the world wet and glimmering under the faint light of dawn. The castle gates opened with a groan, as if welcoming them into a realm where fate and power intertwined. Inside, servants scurried at the sight of the king carrying a child. Whispers erupted like sparks in dry grass, but none dared question him. "This child stays," he said, his voice cold but final. "No harm will come to her under my roof." A healer approached, wary but obedient. She took the baby from him, wrapping her in warm blankets and murmuring soothing words. The baby's eyes never left the king's face, as though she already knew him, already recognized the place where she was meant to belong. As the Alpha King turned away, he felt a strange sensation, a chill followed by a whisper on the wind. It was faint, almost imperceptible, yet it sent a shiver down his spine. "Mother." The word was barely audible, yet it resonated deep within the castle walls, echoing in chambers long abandoned by love and laughter. The king paused. The prophecy, the blood moon, could it be? He shook the thought away and strode to his chambers. But sleep did not come easily that night. He found himself walking the halls, listening for cries, watching over the infant as though she were both fragile and formidable at the same time. In that small, quiet presence, he felt something awaken, a tenderness he had long thought buried beneath armor and power. Days turned into weeks, and the child, now named Lyra by the king, began to grow. She was clever and observant, her bright eyes noticing things others overlooked. She smiled at shadows, laughed at the smallest creatures, and cried when she sensed sadness, even if she did not understand it. The Alpha King found himself watching her more than the court, more than the council, more than the battles and negotiations that consumed his days. Protecting her was no longer a duty. It was a choice, a longing that touched the deepest parts of him. But not everyone in the castle welcomed Lyra. The queen, a woman of sharp wit and suspicion, watched the child with narrowed eyes. "She may be cursed," the queen whispered to a servant. "The child of the blood moon brings ruin. You mark my words." The Alpha King heard this, though he said nothing. He had faced countless threats, murderers, rebels, spirits of vengeance. Yet none unsettled him like the fragility of Lyra, nor did anyone ignite the spark of hope and fear within him so completely. One night as the wind howled against the castle walls, Lyra stirred in her cradle. The king, unable to sleep, walked quietly to her room. She was awake, staring at the window, eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and fear. "Do you remember the forest?" he asked softly. She tilted her head, and in her tiny voice she whispered words she could not have known. "Dark as shadows." The king knelt beside her. "Yes," he said, "but you are safe now. I will not let harm come to you." Her small hand reached for his, and the warmth of her touch felt like a spark against the coldness of his heart. In that moment, the Alpha King understood something profound. This child was no ordinary being. She carried within her the weight of prophecy, the hint of power, and the possibility of redemption, not just for herself, but for him, for the kingdom, for all that had been broken and abandoned. Yet even as he stood there, listening to her breathing slow and her eyelids droop with sleep, he sensed a presence, a darkness just beyond the light of the room. The air shifted, carrying a faint whisper. "She does not belong to you yet." The king's hand tightened around hers, though he felt no fear. "Then I will find her," he said quietly, almost to himself. "No one will take her from me." Morning came with a pale sun breaking through storm clouds. The forest beyond the castle seemed calm, but the Alpha King knew better. The storm outside had passed, but storms of fate, of magic, and of shadows were only beginning. And somewhere, hidden in the trees, eyes watched the castle, waiting for the moment when the fragile, abandoned child might step into the destiny that had been written for her before she had even taken her first breath. Lyra stirred in her crib once more, and for a heartbeat she looked at the king as if understanding the weight of all that had brought her here. Her small lips parted, and a tiny, determined whisper broke the silence. "Help me." The Alpha King knelt beside her, heart swelling with determination. The child who had been left to die in a sack in the forest was now his charge, his responsibility, and perhaps the key to a future none could yet imagine. Outside the window, the forest seemed alive with whispers, shadows stirring, and the faintest glimmer of something ancient and powerful awakening. The journey was just beginning. The castle was alive with whispers. Its stone walls held centuries of secrets, and the corridors smelled of wax, old wood, and faint traces of forgotten magic. Lyra had grown, now a curious, bright-eyed child of 6, her hair like spun night and eyes sharp as the forest under moonlight. She had not forgotten the forest, nor the stormy night that had brought her into the Alpha King's care. She sometimes asked the king about it, her small hands tugging at the edge of his cloak, her voice filled with a mixture of innocence and wonder. "You saved me," she said one morning, her wide eyes studying his stern face. "Why?" The Alpha King, tall and formidable, paused. His cloak brushed the polished stone floor as he knelt beside her. "Because no one deserves to be left alone," he said softly, careful not to admit the truth. That part of him felt bound to her by something older than kindness, something he could not name. Lyra smiled faintly, her small fingers brushing against his scarred hand. Though she was young, she seemed to understand him in ways no one else could. She listened when he spoke, sometimes even before he had spoken, as though her heart carried echoes of forgotten truths. But the castle was not without shadows. The queen, elegant and sharp, regarded Lyra with suspicion. The child's strange insight, her uncanny knowledge of things she should not know, unnerved her. "She may bring ruin," the queen whispered to the court magician. "The child of the blood moon is dangerous." The magician, a quiet man with a pale face and deep-set eyes, nodded. He had seen strange omens surrounding Lyra, sudden gusts of wind when she laughed, shadows that danced even without candlelight, and visions she could not have imagined. Yet he dared not speak against the Alpha King, whose authority was absolute. Lyra wandered the halls of the castle freely, always careful, always curious. She loved the library, where tall shelves held scrolls and books older than anyone remembered. The spines smelled of dust and time, and she ran her fingers over them as if she could feel their history. Sometimes she whispered words she did not fully understand, and the words seemed to hum with a quiet power, like a thread connecting her to something far beyond the castle walls. The Alpha King watched her closely. His advisors were concerned about her unusual behavior, but he dismissed their fear. She was his responsibility, and more than that, he trusted her instinctively. He could see in her the spark of destiny, the echo of a prophecy that had haunted him since he first heard her cries in the storm. One evening, as the sun dipped beneath the mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, Lyra slipped from her room, drawn by a soft glow in the castle's eastern wing. The walls were quiet, and the servants had long retired. She followed the light to a chamber she had never entered before. Inside, the room was filled with strange mirrors, their surfaces swirling like liquid glass. Shadows danced across them, and the air felt charged as though the room itself breathed. Lyra approached, and her reflection shifted before her eyes, showing not herself, but images of a forest she did not recognize, of a woman with eyes like hers, and of shadows that moved with intention. A whisper filled the room, soft as a breeze, cold as the stone beneath her feet. "Lyra," she froze, her heart beating fast. The voice was not the Alpha King-S, nor the Queen-S, nor any servant-S. It was deeper, older, and tinged with longing. Yet instead of fear, Lyra felt a strange pull toward it. Suddenly, the mirrors shimmered, and a shadow appeared behind the glass. Lyra reached out and her fingers brushed the surface. The shadow recoiled and then, with a movement like smoke, drifted closer. She pulled back startled, but then remembered the Alpha King's words, "Trust yourself and you will find strength." With determination, she whispered, "Who are you?" The shadow hesitated, then answered in a voice that carried both sadness and power, "I am part of your past. I am the echo of those who feared you, those who abandoned you. They left a mark and I wait for the day it awakens." Lyra felt a chill, yet also a strange courage. She knew this shadow was not evil, at least not yet. It was part of a larger truth she was meant to uncover, a piece of the puzzle that connected her to the prophecy she had not yet understood. Meanwhile, in the main hall, the Alpha King was summoned by a council meeting. The queen, the magician, and the advisors were gathered, their faces taut with worry. "The child is unusual," the queen said sharply. "I have seen strange occurrences when she is near. The prophecy, it may be true. The child of the blood moon brings both hope and ruin." The Alpha King's jaw tightened. "She is under my protection. Whatever omens exist, I will face them. She is not to be harmed nor doubted. My word is law." The court fell silent. None dared speak further. Even the queen, proud and cunning, lowered her gaze. The king's authority was absolute, but fear lingered in the air, a subtle reminder that destiny was never gentle. That night, Lyra could not sleep. Her thoughts swirled like the shadows in the mirrored chamber. She sensed the forest calling her, whispering of paths she could not yet take, of powers waiting to awaken. She pressed her small hands to her chest, feeling the quiet thrum of something deep within her, a pulse that resonated with the castle, with the king, with the world itself. Suddenly, a soft tapping came at her window. Lyra's eyes widened. No one ever came to her window, and the storm from weeks ago had passed. She tiptoed closer, peering through the rain-specked glass. Outside, a figure emerged from the shadows of the trees. It was tall, cloaked, and unearthly. Lyra's heart beat faster, but she did not feel fear. Somehow she knew the figure was connected to her past, to the night she was abandoned. "Lyra," the figure called, its voice echoing like the rustle of leaves. "Come to me." She hesitated. Her instincts screamed caution, yet something within her, a spark she could not name, urged her to listen. She whispered into the night, "Who are you?" The figure did not answer, only beckoned. Lyra knew then that the forest's secrets were stirring, that her life was entwined with forces far older and darker than she had imagined. In the king's chambers, he sensed the shift immediately. He rose, his senses alert, and moved toward her room, feeling the pulse of destiny tighten around the child. He found her at the window, eyes wide, staring into the dark forest. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low but commanding. Lyra turned, her small hands gripping the windowsill. "Someone is calling me," she whispered. "They know me. I think they know my story." The king's gaze followed hers to the forest. There, in the dim light of the moon breaking through clouds, he saw a shadow, a figure that moved with intent, almost gliding over the wet earth. His hand went to the hilt of his sword, yet his heart was pulled not by fear, but by a protective force that had grown since the day he found her in the storm. He knelt beside Lyra. "Stay here. No harm will come to you," he said, though even he felt the tremor of uncertainty. The next morning the castle was abuzz with rumors. Servants whispered of shadows seen along the walls, of candles flickering without wind, of a strange pull toward the forest. The queen grew more suspicious, pressing the Alpha King for answers. "Something follows her," she said, her eyes sharp. "It will not stop until it has what it seeks." The king's response was simple, yet filled with quiet authority. "Then I will find it first. Whatever comes, it will face me before it reaches her." Lyra, unaware of the tension in the court, wandered the halls once more. She felt the forest calling, the shadows moving, the echoes of her abandoned past stirring. She could not understand it fully, but a part of her knew that her journey had only begun. In the evening she returned to the mirrored chamber. The shadows had shifted, forming shapes that were almost human, almost alive. One shadow, taller and more defined than the others, stepped forward. "You have grown," it said, voice soft but resonant. "And yet you are still unaware of your power, your destiny, your path. You must prepare. Soon the darkness will come." Lyra swallowed, her small chest rising and falling. "I will be ready," she said bravely, though she did not yet know what that meant. The shadow seemed to nod, fading back into the mirror, leaving the chamber silent and still. The Alpha King found her there later that night, standing alone. He reached for her hand, and she grasped it without hesitation. "I am not afraid," she said quietly. "You are stronger than you know," he replied, a strange tenderness in his voice. "And I will be here always." Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Something ancient was awakening. The castle, the forest, and the child's destiny were beginning to collide in ways none could foresee. And in the distance, the shadow of the forest moved closer, patient, watching, waiting for the moment to strike. The forest beyond the castle had grown restless. The trees whispered to one another, leaves rustling with secrets older than the mountains. The rain had left the earth soft and dark, and faint mist clung to the trunks like veils. Somewhere in that mist, shadows stirred, watching, waiting, their movements deliberate and patient. Lyra, now 8 years old, had begun to sense them more clearly. She felt their presence in the corners of her mind, in the quiet moments when no one else noticed. Her powers, still subtle, hummed beneath her skin like a hidden drumbeat, urging her to understand what was coming. The Alpha King watched her closely, aware that the danger surrounding her was growing. Since the shadow had first appeared in the mirrored chamber, he had strengthened the castle's wards and assigned trusted guards to patrol the outer walls. But even with all precautions, he could feel it in his bones. Something ancient, something relentless was moving toward Lyra. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, painting the sky in copper and purple, Lyra wandered the castle gardens. The fountains glimmered with the last light of day, and the statues of long-forgotten kings cast long, distorted shadows across the cobblestones. She paused, sensing a presence not bound by the castle walls. The air shimmered, and a figure appeared at the edge of the garden, a tall silhouette with eyes that glowed like embers. Lyra's heart quickened, but instead of fear she felt a pull, a recognition she could not explain. "You are ready," the figure said, its voice deep and resonant, carrying both sorrow and authority. "But are you prepared for what lies ahead?" Lyra straightened, her small hands curling into fists. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I will try." The figure stepped closer and the mist swirled around it like living smoke. "I am part of your past," it said, "bound to your family, bound to the curse that haunts you. I have watched over you, waited for you to awaken." Lyra's brow furrowed. "The curse?" she asked. "What do you mean?" The figure lowered its head, its glowing eyes softening. "Long ago, your family was tied to the blood moon, to magic that could either protect or destroy. They feared you before you were born, abandoning you to avoid the prophecy. But it is not too late. Your power can break the chains, or it can bind them forever." A shiver ran down Lyra's spine. She had always felt different, a pull toward shadows, a way of sensing what others could not. But now she understood. She carried the weight of destiny, and the forest, the castle, and even the Alpha King's heart were intertwined with it. From the shadows of the castle walls, the Alpha King had followed her silently. He had watched the mist curl around the figure, felt the pull in the air, and knew that Lyra's confrontation with destiny had begun. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, yet he felt powerless to intervene. This was not a fight he could win alone. It was hers. The figure extended a hand, faintly glowing. "Come," it said, "I will show you the truth." Lyra hesitated, glancing toward the castle. She saw the Alpha King's silhouette against the rising moonlight, his eyes filled with concern and unspoken questions. She felt the weight of trust pressing upon her. Then she stepped forward, placing her hand in the shadow S. In an instant, the garden vanished. The mist became a swirling vortex, and Lyra felt herself lifted, carried through visions of the past. She saw her parents in the moment they abandoned her, their faces twisted with fear and sorrow. She saw the night of the blood moon, the light casting long shadows that twisted like serpents across the ground. And she saw herself, small but fierce, standing in the center of the prophecy, her hands glowing with an ancient, untapped power. The Alpha King, still at the garden gate, sensed her absence. Panic rose within him. He ran to the spot where she had stood, only to find the mist fading. Her small footprints led toward the forest edge, though the air was empty. "Lyra," he called, his voice echoing into the night. "Stay where I can see you." Inside the visions, Lyra felt both fear and clarity. The shadow guided her, showing her how her powers could interact with the world, how she could shape elements, glimpse truths hidden from others, and sense danger before it arrived. But with each revelation came the burden of choice. Power was a gift, but it demanded responsibility, courage, and sacrifice. The shadow paused in front of a vision of the castle. "You are not alone," it whispered. "Your bond with the Alpha King is strong. He will guide you, protect you, and challenge you." "But the curse is real and it will not wait," Lyra nodded. Though she was small, determination shone in her eyes. "I will not let it win," she said, her voice steady. "I will protect everyone I love." The shadow's form softened, and for a moment it seemed almost human. "Then you are ready," it said. "But readiness is only the first step. Darkness will come for you soon, testing the strength of your heart and the courage of those around you." With that, the vision dissolved. Lyra found herself back in the garden, the moon casting silver light on the fountains. She was alone, but she felt different, stronger, more certain, and aware of a destiny that had been waiting for her. The Alpha King arrived moments later, breathless from his run. "Lyra," he called. He grabbed her small hands in his, eyes scanning her face for any sign of harm. "I'm all right," she said, meeting his gaze. I saw things. I understand more now." His brows furrowed, worry etched into his features. "Things?" he asked. "Lyra, you must not wander so far. The forest is dangerous." "I know," she said, her voice steady, "but I feel something is coming, something I must face." The king's chest tightened. He had faced enemies, battles, and curses, yet nothing had made his heart feel so exposed as Lyra's words. He pulled her close, a protective instinct rising within him. "Then you will face it with me," he said firmly. "I will not let anything take you." Days passed, and the shadow's presence grew stronger. Strange occurrences filled the castle. Candles flickered without wind, shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, and whispers echoed in empty halls. The queen's suspicion turned to fear. "The child's power grows," she told the council magician. "We cannot control it. The prophecy is awakening." The magician nodded, worry deep in his eyes. "She is the key," he said. "The curse is bound to her. Whatever darkness comes will seek her first." Lyra sensed this too. Her dreams were filled with visions of the forest, of shadows twisting toward the castle, of voices calling her name. She practiced controlling her abilities in secret, shaping small elements, listening to whispers of the wind, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her feet. One night the shadow returned in the mirrored chamber. This time it was more defined, its form sharper and its presence heavier. "The curse will attempt to claim you," it said, "but you have a choice. Stand strong and you can change fate. Falter and the darkness will spread beyond your family, beyond your kingdom." Lyra's eyes blazed with determination. "I will not falter," she said. "I will face it, and I will protect everyone I love." The shadow nodded once, then dissolved into the mirrors. Lyra felt a calm settle over her, as though she had accepted a responsibility she had carried all her life without knowing it. But outside, in the forest, the darkness stirred. A figure cloaked in shadow moved silently through the trees, its gaze fixed on the castle. It had been patient, waiting for Lyra to grow, waiting for her power to awaken. And now it was time. The Alpha King sensed the change before it fully arrived. He stood at the battlements that night, watching the forest, sword in hand, senses alert. He knew the coming challenge would test him in ways he had never imagined, not just as a king, but as a guardian of the child who had become his heart. Lyra joined him, her small hand slipping into his. "I feel it," she said quietly. "Something is coming for us." He nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Then we will face it together," he said. "No matter what comes, you are not alone." The wind picked up, carrying a whisper through the trees. "Soon, very soon, she cannot hide forever." Lyra clenched her fists, determination shining in her young eyes. "I am ready," she said. The Alpha King tightened his grip on her hand, heart both proud and fearful. Whatever came next, he would not let it take her. And from the depths of the forest, a shadowed figure began its march toward the castle, silent, unstoppable, and hungry for the power that Lyra had only just begun to understand. The forest was alive with movement. Shadows twisted between the ancient trees, their forms sharp and purposeful. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the dark earth. Somewhere within that darkness, the figure that had been watching Lyra for years moved like a whisper, patient but relentless. The Alpha King stood at the edge of the castle gates, his cloak billowing in the wind, his sword in hand. Beside him, Lyra, now 9, radiated quiet confidence. Her eyes, bright as the morning stars, reflected determination, courage, and a growing understanding of her own power. She had trained in secret, learning to control the elements, listen to the whispers of the wind, and sense shadows before they moved. Yet she knew this would be her greatest test. The king's voice was low and steady. "Stay close," he said. "Whatever waits for us, it will not escape justice." Lyra nodded. "I'm ready," she said. Her small hand slid into his, grounding them both against the chill of the night and the tension in the air. The shadows parted, and the figure emerged fully from the mist, a tall, cloaked presence with eyes glowing like embers. It radiated power and malice, but also a strange familiarity. Lyra's heart recognized it, the echo of her family, the remnants of the curse, the ancient force that had haunted her since birth. "You have grown," the figure said, voice like wind through hollow trees. "But growth alone cannot break what was bound before you were born." Lyra lifted her chin. "I am not the child you abandoned. I am Lyra, and I will not be claimed by your darkness." The Alpha King stepped forward, sword raised. "You will harm no one," he said. "This child is under my protection. Leave now or face the consequences." The shadow laughed softly, a sound that sent chills through the night. "Protection is meaningless. Fate will not be denied. The curse moves with her blood, and her power is mine to claim." Lyra's hand glowed faintly, a subtle shimmer of magic. The Alpha King noticed it and felt both pride and awe. Her power had grown, but the real strength came from her heart, her courage, her choice to stand against darkness rather than flee. The shadow advanced, and with it, the forest seemed to shift. Roots rose like serpents, vines twisted and mist thickened, forming walls and obstacles to block their path. But Lyra did not falter. She raised her hands, whispering words she had learned in secret, and the elements responded. A breeze swirled around her, lifting the mist, pushing aside the roots. Stones trembled and glowed faintly, as if acknowledging her command. The Alpha King moved beside her, his presence anchoring her courage. "Together," he said, and she nodded. The shadow attacked, its form expanding into something monstrous, black tendrils lashing toward them like living ink. Lyra's magic met it with a force of light, small at first, then growing stronger with each heartbeat. The Alpha King struck with his sword, cutting through tendrils, holding the creature back. Yet it was not just a physical fight. It was a test of will, of heart, of destiny itself. The shadow hissed, recoiling, then formed a wall of darkness between them. "You cannot defeat me," it said. "You are only a child and he is only a man. Your combined strength is not enough." Lyra stepped forward, voice strong. "I am more than I was yesterday. I am more than fear. And I will not let you harm anyone I love." The words carried power. The light around her grew, spilling into the shadows like dawn breaking a long night. The Alpha King felt the shift. Her courage was the true weapon. The magic was only a reflection of her inner strength. The shadow faltered, uncertainty flickering across its form. "Impossible," it whispered. "She cannot," Lyra advanced, eyes blazing. "You do not control me, you never did." The shadow shrieked and recoiled, then dissolved into the mist with a roar that echoed through the forest. The night became still. The tension lifted, replaced by a quiet calm. The curse had been confronted, challenged, and broken, not by violence alone, but by courage, choice, and love. Lyra fell to her knees, exhausted, but the Alpha King caught her gently. He held her close, pride and relief flooding through him. "You were incredible," he said softly. "You faced it, you did not run." Lyra rested her small head against his chest. "I wasn't alone," she whispered. "You were with me." The Alpha King's heart tightened. For years he had protected many, ruled kingdoms, fought enemies, but never had he felt the depth of connection that this child inspired. In her courage, he found his own heart softened, expanded, changed. They returned to the castle, walking through halls that now seemed brighter, freer, as if the shadows had receded forever. The queen, the magician, and the court waited, tense but relieved to see Lyra safe. Even they could not deny what had happened. The child of the blood moon had grown into a force of destiny, and the Alpha King had stood by her side, their bond stronger than any fear or prophecy. The queen stepped forward, her expression softened. "The curse, it is broken?" she asked. Lyra nodded, small hands lifted slightly. "I faced it," she said simply, "and it is no longer bound to me or this castle." The court magician, usually quiet and solemn, looked at her with awe. "You have done what many believed impossible. The prophecy, it has changed." The Alpha King knelt beside Lyra. "You have changed it," he said, "not by power alone, but by courage, by heart, by choosing to stand." Lyra smiled faintly, leaning against him. "I will protect this kingdom with you." The Alpha King's chest tightened. Protect, yes, but more than that, he would guide her, nurture her, and stand by her side as she grew into the force she was destined to become. She was no longer the abandoned child in the sack, shivering in the forest. She was Lyra, the child of the blood moon, a girl who could shape destiny and hearts alike. Days passed, and the castle began to feel alive in a new way. Shadows no longer lurked in the halls. Candles burned steadily. The forest at the edges seemed less threatening, almost protective, as if acknowledging the courage of the child who had once been left to die. Lyra spent her mornings exploring the gardens, learning the ways of the land, her abilities now more controlled, more confident. The Alpha King trained with her, teaching discipline, strategy, and strength, though he knew the lessons went deeper than any skill. They were learning trust, understanding, and a connection that transcended words. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains in brilliant gold, Lyra and the Alpha King stood at the battlements. The wind swept through their hair, and the view stretched for miles: forest, river, mountains, and castle, all bathed in twilight. "You've grown stronger," the king said quietly, eyes on her. Lyra looked out over the lands, then back at him. "I have you to thank for that," she said softly. "You believed in me even when I wasn't sure." His gaze softened, the weight of centuries of rule and battle melting for a moment. "I have always believed in you," he said. "From the moment I heard your first cry, I knew you were not just a child. You were hope." Lyra smiled faintly, leaning against his side. "Then I will always try to live up to that." The castle was quiet, the forest calm. The threat of shadows and curses had been met, and for the first time, the Alpha King felt a peace that was more than just relief. It was connection, trust, and the unspoken bond between guardian and child, between protector and one destined to change the world. As night fell, the stars above seemed to shimmer with promise. Lyra, standing beside the Alpha King, whispered to the wind, "I was abandoned, but I am never alone." And in the distance, where the forest met the horizon, the faintest glimmer of light shimmered, like a blessing from forces unseen. The darkness had been challenged, the curse broken, and the kingdom was ready to step into a future shaped not by fear, but by courage, love, and destiny. The Alpha King placed a hand on her shoulder. "This is only the beginning," he said. "There will always be shadows. But you will face them." Lyra nodded, small but resolute. "And I will not be afraid." Together they looked out over the land, king and child, protector and destined force, knowing that no matter what came, they would face it together. The story of the abandoned child had become a story of courage, choice, and redemption. The castle, the forest, and the stars above seemed to hum with approval, and for the first time, the Alpha King allowed himself a rare smile. Destiny had been tested, and together they had prevailed.